So if you love wild, bonkers genre movies from the 1980s, I'm talking action, sci-fi, horror, comedy, chances are at least some of those movies are from Cannon Films. Cannon was a film production company back in the day, but their heyday was really the 1980s. They were run by a couple of Israeli immigrants named Golan and Globus, and in their short tenure as kings of Hollywood, they were kings of the insane B-movies. And there are so many fun films that came out in the 1980s. I just love them. There's a great documentary about them called Electric Boogaloo, The Wild Untold Story of Cannon Films. Highly recommend that to learn more about them, but in this video, we're going to talk about what I think are the best. Welcome to the Cobwebs channel, everyone. My name is Daniel, and it's time to talk about my top 15 Cannon movies of all time. So let's jump in at number 15 with Ninja 3: The Domination from 1984. So this movie is about an aerobics instructor who is possessed by the spirit of an evil dead ninja. Whenever she comes under his influence, she becomes a ninja herself and goes out and slaughters his enemies. Meanwhile, her boyfriend's trying to figure out what's going on, trying to help her, and enlists the help of Sho Kasugi, the good ninja, to try to stop her. So this movie is like the personification of what makes Cannon Films special. It's such a good movie to start the list off with. Now, it's part of a trilogy of ninja films that Cannon did. Cannon's really responsible for putting ninjas into the mainstream over here in the West. The first two movies in the trilogy are Enter the Ninja and Revenge of the Ninja. And this one's starring Franco Nero as a ninja. It's not terribly good, but it definitely has its charms. Revenge of the Ninja is pretty good. It puts Sho Kasugi in the lead role, and he's just great with the martial arts. But Ninja 3 is my favorite. It's such a fun, ridiculous movie. I mean, just imagine they had the idea to put together The Exorcist, Flashdance, and ninja action all together in one movie. The results are not a movie you can take seriously, but a movie to have a really fun time with. The lead is played by Lucinda Dickey. She did a lot of stuff with Cannon, she was the lead in Breakin', a breakdance movie that's actually pretty fun. It's not on the list, but it is pretty fun. And her boyfriend is this guy with the most shoulder and back hair that I have seen this side of King Kong. But none of that is what makes this movie crazy. It's the possession scenes, the horror, the violence, and ninja action. Not a successful movie when it came out, but a cult hit now. It's a blast. At number 14, The Last American Virgin from 1982. So this is Cannon's version of a typical teen sex comedy back in the 80s. It's a slice of life movie about a group of high school friends juggling things like work and relationships and school. And there's some love triangle stuff going on, some romantic rivalry that's threatening to tear them apart. So, funny thing about this movie, it's actually a very close remake of a movie called Lemon Popsicle, which is a teen sex comedy from Israel that Menahem Golan made over there. So he just came to America and remade his own movie as an American teen sex comedy. And it kind of explains this movie. Now, the thing about this film that really struck me the first time I saw it is incredibly raunchy. And I have seen a lot of sex comedies, I've seen American Pie and Porky's and Van Wilder and all that kind of stuff. And in terms of just raunchiness, this movie blows them all out of the water. It's kind of shocking. And it makes sense when you think it's not really an American film. It's not really made to be like the American films. It was a movie in Israel, and they just kind of copy-pasted it over here. In addition to all that zaniness and dirtiness and pretty funny stuff, this movie is also dealing with some pretty serious issues sometimes. It's got weird tonal shifts. And the end of the movie is actually incredibly impactful, which is surprising about one of these movies. You don't normally end a teen sex comedy feeling like you got punched in the gut, but you kind of do at the end of this movie. It's pretty shocking. At number 13, Over the Top from 1987. So this movie stars Sylvester Stallone as a blue-collar truck driver, salt-of-the-earth kind of guy. And it turns out he used to be married to a very rich woman, and he had a son, but something happened in the relationship, he had to leave, and now he's estranged from his 12-year-old son. But they're thrown back together when the mother asks him to drive him from his military boarding school, where he's learning to be very prim and proper, over to visit her in the hospital. So it's really a road trip movie. It's a cross-country road trip film where Sylvester Stallone bonds with his son. And the thing about this movie is It's incredibly schmaltzy. It is like so sentimental in like a way that's almost shocking how much it's just going for the tears. Now, this one was actually directed by Menahem Golan of Golden Globus. So yeah, he did this one himself. And the thing that actually makes the movie kind of work is Stallone is just so lovable. He really brings that Rocky charm to this film where you just can't help but root for him, love him. You really just want his relationship with his son to work out. His son, who is a little brat at times, but you can see the good kid that's in there that Stallone's trying to bring out of him. And, you know, the movie also works for me because I just really love father-son stuff in movies. It always gets to me. So there's really good father-son emotions in here, even though they're going over the top with how emotional they're trying to make you, I think, in this movie. Also a very corny 80s soundtrack, but I love that. I love the corny, cheesy 80s songs that are all in canon films. But all this, and I haven't even mentioned that this is an arm wrestling movie. Yes, this is a movie that culminates with an arm wrestling competition. And how many movies have you seen with an arm wrestling competition? Probably not very many. So this is just a silly little 80s drama, but it's actually pretty fun, and Stallone is just great in it. At number 12, Dangerously Close from 1986. So this is one of those intense high school drama thrillers. They made a few of these back in the 80s, like Tough Turf and The New Kids. And Dangerously Close really fits in there. It is about a school newspaper reporter, a high schooler, who is trying to report on the Sentinels, which are a group of rich, privileged guys in this school who basically have assigned themselves as the police force for the school. And they go around trying to keep the school safe, but really they're just all about their own personal selfish agendas and beating anyone down who stands in their way. So our main character is starting to be sucked in by them, but also trying to figure out what's going on with them and then how to bring them down. So this is an Albert Pyun movie. If you don't know Albert Pyun, he did a lot of work with Cannon actually, but he just made a lot of really schlocky B movies and sometimes C movies. And he made the Captain America movie from the 1990s, which in my opinion, I can't lie, is absolutely terrible. But this is the most slick and professional and polished movie that I have ever seen from him. It's good. This is just a good, intense teen drama, pretty brutal at times, almost goes into slasher territory. And if you're a fan of 80s horror movies, which if you're watching this video, I'm sure you are, it's actually got a really good cast. It's got John Stockwell from Christine, Dee Pfeiffer from Vamp, Miguel Nunez Jr. and Tom Matthews from Return of the Living Dead. So yeah, it's just packed with familiar faces. It's an intense, violent teen drama, one that's trying to tackle some real issues and does fairly well with them, I think, even though it is pretty over the top. I mean, what school would allow their own student-led police force called the Sentinels? I mean, that's pretty ridiculous. But it uses that to talk about some issues, and I think it's pretty interesting. At number 11, Invasion USA from 1985. So this is about a foreign power led by Richard Lynch, who come in with their army into the United States to invade it and take it over. They talk about how nobody's invaded the America in so long, and we're going to come in and kill them all and take over. And who's going to stand in their way? The Army? The Marines? The Navy SEALs? No, Chuck Norris. Just Chuck Norris. He's going to blow them all up and come out and save the day. So Chuck Norris is synonymous with Cannon films. He made a ton of movies with Cannon. I've seen a lot of them. Invasion USA, I think, is the best. So this is the only Chuck Norris movie that's going to appear on this list. And by the way, I just got this on this new Vinegar Syndrome 4K. Oh my gosh, it looks so cool. But this movie is insane and ridiculous on so many levels. I mean, for one thing, the army that comes in to take over the United States doesn't seem to be very big. They hop into maybe 10 or 12 trucks and just roll on in. And their plan is to blow up suburbs. I mean, there's a scene where they roll into a suburb and just start bazookaing houses all over. They go into a mall and start just killing people. This movie has a body count beyond any horror movie you've ever seen. An insane amount of people die. I've heard this described as a slasher movie where these foreign soldiers are basically the dumb teenagers and Chuck Norris is Jason Voorhees.
If you come back in here, I'm gonna hit you with so many rights, you're gonna beg for a left.
Because what the movie is a series of scenes where these bad guys come into a place, start wrecking havoc, and Chuck Norris shows up and slaughters them all. And it's awesome. I actually really like Chuck Norris. I don't totally know why, because I know he's not a very good actor. He's pretty wooden, but I don't know if it's just the beard and the mullet or just the fact that he looks really cool in action scenes. Him just annihilating these guys all over the place is so awesome. So I really enjoy Invasion USA. It is dumb and ridiculous, but really fun. At number 10, we've got New Year's Evil from 1980. So this is a slasher film that takes place on New Year's Eve with a woman who's doing a live countdown to midnight, and she gets a live call into the show from a guy who says every time it becomes midnight in one of the time zones in America, he's going to kill somebody. So you've got that kind of intensity of her trying to figure out, is this real? Is this not? But also, this is an 80s slasher film that takes a very unique perspective of a lot of times it's following the killer, and he's just this guy, and you don't know who he is, but you see what he looks like, and you just follow him as he goes into different places, lies his way to get in places, makes friends with somebody, and then kills them. And in that way, it's a really interesting, unique 80s slasher. I've actually talked about this movie several times on the channel, so regular viewers know. The kills are often pretty brutal. I like the New Year's setting, and it's got some really interesting twists and turns towards the end, especially as you're finding out what the deal actually is with this killer. It's pretty interesting. At number 9, Cyborg from 1989. So this stars Jean-Claude Van Damme as a slinger, which is some kind of warrior in this post-apocalyptic world who is tasked to escort a cyborg from one place to another through just war-torn, post-apocalyptic wasteland. I almost don't want to say wasteland because it sounds too much like Mad Max. But come on, all these movies are Mad Max ripoffs, let's be honest. So yeah, Jean-Claude Van Damme made several movies with Cannon. This one's one of my favorites. It's actually also directed by Albert Pyun. This is my favorite Albert Pyun movie. Interesting story how this movie came about. So Cannon was going to make Masters of the Universe 2, which they made the first Masters of the Universe with Dolph Lundgren and Courtney Cox. And that movie's not going to be on the list because I don't love it. But, you know, some people are nostalgic about it. They were going to make a sequel. They were also going to make Spider-Man. They were going to make a Spider-Man movie, if you can believe that. And they lost the rights to both. For some reason, Mattel and Marvel yanked the rights away, but they'd already spent a lot of money on sets and costumes, and all those sets and costumes went into Cyborg. I don't understand how a Spider-Man movie was going to be made with sets and costumes in this, but somehow that's what happened. Wouldn't you have loved to seen a canon Spider-Man movie? Probably not, because we might not have gotten the Sam Raimi movie otherwise, so we don't want to lose that. But Cyborg is a bleak, often slow, post-apocalyptic film. We actually really like Van Damme in the lead role because Van Damme's very good at being very sad and like brokenhearted and sympathetic, and he really brings that out in this movie. And it's got some awesome fight sequences, including towards the end, you've got a brutal fight scene between him and the main guy whose name is Fender, who is a ferocious beast in this movie. And they have a big fight scene in the rain. I love fight scenes in the rain. Like, I know you Notebook fans, you love a good kiss in the rain, right? But I love a good fight scene in the rain. And Cyborg, that's a great one. At number 8, Avenging Force from 1986. So this is about a special agent who has retired and is just living on a farm trying to take care of his younger sister, who gets pulled back in because his good friend who's trying to get into politics to make some positive changes, his family gets attacked and threatened by this political extremist white supremacist group that is targeting them and also likes to play a sport where they hunt down and kill people. So it's very much like a Hard Target kind of a movie before Hard Target, but a little bit more political. And an interesting thing about this is actually a sequel to Invasion USA, because the character that Chuck Norris plays in this, Matt Hunter, is the same character that Michael Dudikoff then plays in this. So yeah, it's actually a sequel. Hard to believe because Michael Dudikoff is nothing like Chuck Norris. Michael Dudikoff is an action star who made a lot of movies with Cannon. We're actually going to talk about him again on this list. I actually really like him. He's another one like Chuck Norris, not a great actor, but I find him just sympathetic. He's kind of more like Van Damme for me, actually. I find him sympathetic and likable, even when he doesn't have a lot of range. But you've also got Steve James in this. I love Steve James as Dudikoff's friend who's running for Senate. They're great, and I gotta say, this is just such a better movie than Invasion USA. Like, this is the more fun, crazy movie, but this has just got a better story, a better script. Like, the main villain is played by John P. Ryan, who's really good in this, actually. And it's just a good, like, down south country action film, and I really like that setting for an action flick. At number 7, American Ninja from 1985. So this is about an 18-year-old private in the army who has no memory of who he is, what his past is, but when some ninjas attack the army, he learns that he is also a ninja, an American ninja, and it's up to him to stop the bad ninjas. So yeah, this is another canon ninja movie, and it's my favorite one. This is kind of a personal favorite for me. I love this film. I've seen it many times now, and this is the first canon movie with Michael Dudikoff and Steve James, who are paired up again in Avenging Force. And I just love Michael Dudikoff's character in this, and he's got a romance in this with Judy Aronson, who was in Friday the 13th Part 4. She was also in Weird Science, and I love her in this movie. I admit I have such a crush on her, and I love their relationship. I think it's really cute. The movie doesn't spend a lot of time on romance, but what it does, I think, is really effective. And the ninja action is fun. I think it's the best ninja action out of all canon's ninja movies. And I just find Michael Dudikoff so likable. Steve James is such a great buddy for him, and love seeing them in action scenes together. And honestly, this might as well be a tie with American Ninja 2, The Confrontation, which is also a really good movie. Honestly, the sequel might technically be better in a lot of ways, better action, and it's just a straight up buddy movie between Dudikoff and Steve James, but this one has my heart a little bit more, I think, because of the romance, and it's just such a personal favorite, but they're both really good, and if you like B-80s action, I just think these are super fun. At number 6, Cobra from 1986. So this stars Sylvester Stallone as the hardest, most badass cop you've ever seen in your life, with the leather jacket and the toothpick and the cutting pizza with scissors. Yeah, he cuts pizza with scissors in this. But he may have met his match. The ultimate crime-fighting machine may have met his match with the Night Slasher, who is an axe-wielding psychopath serial killer who might actually be a part of a cult of axe-wielding psychopath serial killers. Cobra is a ridiculous movie. It's so ridiculous. It's basically like Stallone's version of Dirty Harry, but if it were really schlocky. By the way, I have it in the Sylvester Stallone collection right here. And, but it's really fun. Now, it's very much like an 80s action meets a horror slasher movie. Cause yes, it is a cult of axe-wielding psychopath serial killers. Like, that's just nuts. But it's pretty interesting how this movie came about. Sylvester Stallone was actually going to play the lead role in Beverly Hills Cop, which eventually went to Eddie Murphy. And he wrote a lot for the script, wanted to go a very different direction than the studio wanted. So they got rid of him, got Eddie Murphy in there. And a lot of what Stallone created for his version of Beverly Hills Cop became Cobra, which is so hard to believe because there's such incredibly different movies, but it is fun. Stallone, when he's not trying to act insanely cool, which is most of the movie, actually his sympatheticness, his heart does come out occasionally. He has a relationship in here with Bridget Nielsen, who he did end up dating in real life, maybe marrying in real life. I don't remember for sure, but Cobra is tons of fun, and it is just quintessential canon action moviness. I've seen it many times. I just love it. At number 5, Runaway Train from 1985. So this is about a couple of really hardened escaped convicts who break out of a maximum security prison and hop onto a train. And it just so happens the driver or conductor or engineer, the engineer of the train, randomly dies. I guess he just has a heart attack. Now this train is out of control with nobody to stop it. So of all these movies, this is the one recent discovery for me. I just watched this movie in preparation for doing this video, and wow, this movie blew me away. Fascinating thing about this film, it's actually from a script that Akira Kurosawa wrote. He wrote it in the 1960s and never ended up making it, and here it became this canon movie, and it's undoubtedly one of the most just legitimately well-made films they ever did. Now, the two lead roles, these hardened convicts, are one Eric Roberts, who's basically like the sweet, dumb guy of the two, and Jon Voight, who is the psychopath of the two, the guy who was locked up in solitary confinement for years because he's just so dangerous. And the two guys are like having a scenery chewing contest. These two actors, like, their performances are so big and so distinct. I just love it. I just loved watching them in this movie, but especially Jon Voight. I thought his performance was spectacular. And you've also got Rebecca De Mornay in this as one of the workers on the train. And it's kind of hard to imagine the girl from risky business as a train worker, but she's actually really good and really convincing. And the movie is incredibly intense, but also like kind of poignant and philosophical at times. It actually, I'm not spoiling anything, but it ends with a Shakespeare quote that comes up on the screen. And you think that sounds dramatic to end a canon movie with William Shakespeare, but it was so fitting and like a gut punch of a quote, and I thought it was amazing. So I just loved Runaway Train. It might be the most like legitimately best movie on the list. We're just going up against some real heavy-hitting personal favorites for me, so that's why I've got it down here, but loved this movie. At number 4, 10 to Midnight from 1983. So this stars Charles Bronson as a tough police detective who is trying to solve a string of murders that are all being done by this one guy trying to catch this serial killer. So like Chuck Norris, Michael Dudikoff, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Charles Bronson is one of the most synonymous actors with Cannon films. He did a lot with Cannon, but primarily did the Death Wish sequels. Death Wish came out back in the 70s, and then Cannon rolled in and said, hey, we want to make some sequels to that, so they made several. I don't like the Death Wish series. It's not my cup of tea. This is my favorite Bronson Cannon movie. Holy cow. 10 to Midnight is like a trash masterpiece. Like, I feel like it's a perfect movie, but perfect at being incredibly sleazy trash, but just so entertaining at doing that. This serial killer, who plays him? This serial killer, played by Andrew Stevens, is basically a proto Patrick Bateman. Like, he's a very handsome guy, but very weird. And whenever he kills someone, it's always in like some kind of a sexual context, and he strips down completely naked and then brutally murders women. And like, it's very exploitation, right? Like, it's very giallo almost. But I just loved watching this police procedural thriller about tracking down the serial killer, who's this incredibly over-the-top, sick monster. And the movie totally works as a slasher film, but just also as a Charles Bronson cop thriller. So just those two things coming together perfectly. The movie's directed by J. Lee Thompson, who's a very accomplished director. I mean, he made the original Cape Fear with Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum, which is great. So the guy really knows what he's doing, even if he's working with trash, which he is here. And 10 to Midnight is so awesome. I just love this. Can't recommend it enough. All right, so we're about to go into the top 3, but don't forget to let me know your favorites down in the comments below. Let's definitely talk about what Cannon movies you love. But let's talk about my number 3, which is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 from 1986. So this is directed by the director of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Tobe Hooper, and it's part of a 3-picture deal that Tobe Hooper made with Cannon Films. After he made Poltergeist and it was a big hit, he signed on with Cannon to make 3 movies with them. There was Invaders from Mars, one other movie that we're going to talk about, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. And this was the big one that they really wanted him to do and why they signed him on, because they wanted to make the sequel to that legendary horror film from the 70s. This came out 12 years after the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So for 12 years, this wasn't even a franchise until this sequel finally came out. And, you know, a lot of people don't love this film because it is a drastic tonal shift from the original. The original is a very dark and terrifying movie. But Tobe Hooper's a weird guy, and he thought that the original was kind of a black comedy, but nobody got it because it was so sick and disturbing. Here, he made that much more overt, and he really tried to make Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 an obvious black comedy, and it is. It is funny, it is goofier, but at the same time, it's still being really sick and disturbing, which is a very weird sauce. It really puts some people off. Some people hate this movie. I love it. I almost think I might like it better than the original. Like, the original, I feel like I love more with my head. I'm like, oh, that's a great film, and it's very scary. But this I love with my heart. This movie just makes me so happy. And even though it's not a Halloween movie, definitely not, it always gives me those Halloween-y feels because there's just so many gross and fun practical effects everywhere you look. It feels like going through a haunted house attraction in October. This movie always gives me that feeling. But it's got a great cast. I mean, this is the movie that put Bill Moseley on the map, and now Bill Moseley is a B-horror icon. It's got Dennis Hopper. It's got Caroline Williams. It is a great time. Lots of screaming, lots of gross-out effects. It is a horror comedy experience all the way in all the insane ways, but I think it's awesome. At number 2, Life Force. So this is about a space crew who goes out into space and meets some extraterrestrials who turn out to be space vampires. A very physically beautiful group of people, but will drain the life force out of you like a vampire would drain blood. One of them gets down to Earth, and a bunch of guys have to figure out where she is and how to stop her before she creates so many other life force vampires that we go into an apocalypse. This is the other Tobe Hooper movie I was talking about, and it was the first movie that he made with Canon. And basically, they let him make this movie because he was going to make Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. And the movie was a huge failure because it's an incredibly expensive movie. This thing cost like $25 million, which was a huge budget at the time for a movie like this. It was based on a book called Space Vampires. And Tobe Hooper said he saw this as his opportunity to make a 70mm Hammer film. And it very much feels like a Hammer movie in terms of it's about a lot of British guys trying to figure out how to stop some kind of monster. But in very much the way those Hammer vampire movies were turning up the sexploitation aspect for their time, this movie's doing that for the 80s because the space vampire walks around naked for almost the entire movie. So the movie's just really going for it. It's very non-commercial, so much nudity, so much weirdness. It is a bizarre experience in so many different ways. The acting, the special effects, they're huge and crazy. Yeah, it was not commercial and it was not successful and it lost Canon a ton of money. But wow, I love it. One of the reasons I love the horror genre is I love the imagination of horror. And this movie just has so much imagination on display. It's just one of the most unique movies you're ever going to see. And some people hate it, I know, like pretty much any Canon movie, but I love it. But at number 1, Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, Canon did make that movie. No, my actual number 1 is Bloodsport from 1988. So this stars Jean-Claude Van Damme as Frank Dukes, a man who comes to Hong Kong to fight in a secret underground full contact martial arts tournament called the Kumite. So yes, this is another one of Van Damme's collaborations with Canon. He also made Kickboxer with them, which is pretty good. Didn't quite make my list. I think Bloodsport is so much better. This has been a personal favorite for me ever since I was a kid. My dad, when I turned 12, my dad started showing me all the 80s, 90s action movies, the classics. And from that time on to the present, my favorite action star is Jean-Claude Van Damme. I love him. I find him just the most sympathetic and like relatable of all the action stars. When I see Arnold Schwarzenegger on screen, I love him, but I don't relate to him. I don't feel anything like him. But Van Damme has this like vulnerability and sensitivity to him where I just feel like I relate to him more. And I just love him in this movie. He's just so sweet. He's just such a nice guy. He's got this bromance with this other guy fighting in there, and I just love their friendship. He's got an actual romance with a reporter there, and I love that too. And the fight scenes are amazing. It's the best fight tournament movie I've ever seen. And I've seen quite a bit of them. They don't always work for me. This one, it's awesome. I care so much about Van Damme coming out on top in this. I love the end fight scene when he fights Bolo Young, who's an incredible adversary. I love all the fun 80s songs that are on the soundtrack, like a lot of Canon movies. This one definitely has that. They say it's based on a true story about this guy, Frank Dukes, who was actually like a fight choreographer consultant, I think, on the film. But it came out after the movie that guy was probably lying about a lot of things. He was probably full of it. But whatever. It made for a great movie. And this is probably my favorite movie from my favorite action star. And I gotta say, it's my favorite Canon movie. By the way, it just kind of breaks my heart that I just have it in this double pack with Time Cop. We gotta get a better release of this. Give me this on 4K here in the States. So that's my list, but I want to know yours. Let me know your favorite Canon movies down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, check out this list right over here for my favorite 1980s films. I think if you enjoyed this, you'll enjoy that video. I've also got a playlist down here of all of my best of ranking lists. And give a like if you enjoyed this and subscribe for more videos like this. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.